to birth and name our children, to do business, to dress, to grow food, to marry, to own, to preserve history, to read and write, to serve in the military, to travel, to vote, to worship. Before Juneteenth, or before the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, enslaved Africans could not do any of those 12 things. I know you're like, really? Well, yes, this is true. In fact, let me make this a little more uncomfortable for you. Ready? If you go to Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, right? Everyone knows Monticello. That's, of course, where Thomas Jefferson's house is. There's a part of Monticello that has a listing of the names of all the slaves. You're going to see a very weird pattern that happens. A lot of the women that were born were named Mary. A lot of the men that were there are named John. Now, everyone for a moment, imagine that you've had a child. Pick a name for your child. Everyone ready? You pick a name for your child. Let me hear the name of your child. Let me hear a name. What do you have?
Name for a child?
Name for a child.
Richard.
Richard. Sounds solid. Cool. No answer? Huh? Katie. Benjamin. Clarice.
That's a good one.
Zara. So no one's picking Mary or John, correct? So this is the uncomfortableness of it. The reason why many slaves at Monticello were named Mary or John was because a Mary had died. So therefore, we didn't want to learn another name. Well, I want to name my child Benjamin. I want to name my child Katie. Well, you couldn't, because your choices were either Mary or John. Well, I want to name my child Katie. Well, that's fine. Katie doesn't live here. I sell Katie. Mary can live here. What's the name of your child? It completely changes the whole dialogue of what you're having in your mind. Something just as simple as to be able to name your child. Another thing that I point out was the ability to record history. Like right now, what Danielle's doing is recording history. But imagine at a time that this could not happen. Why? Because it's unlawful. Believe it or not, it was not just unlawful for slaves to read and write, but it was unlawful for them to keep a functioning family tree of what was happening. Therefore, who you're related to, why you're related to them. Those things were absolutely destroyed. Why? Because once again, once you start to build community, you start to build strength. Once you start to build strength, you realize that you're a person. Speaking of a person, how many people heard of Dred Scott? Yes, sweet. So in 1857, of course we know that being the Dred Scott case, Chief Justice Taney, in basically passing that Dred Scott was not a human, that he was property, said that there was no rite of passageway for an enslaved African to ever become a citizen. And that any time a white man could take a free African and bring them back south. And they could once again be back enslaved. What is to the slave July 4th? Well, that's why there's Juneteenth. So, I want y'all to look at something real quick. I believe that everyone's smart. Therefore, good people, what does this say right here? No? No? Anyone know? What if I told you your passage to freedom was in this statement? No? No one can read this. No. No? No one has an idea.
Oh, wait. Can we go free pass?
No, you can't. No, you can't Google. It's what?
No,
1857. No.
I'm recording you. I'm not.
Oh no. So here we go. So I want you all to look at
I just
something
said
real
no
quick.
free passage, but I don't know if that was right.
No. So here we go. Watch this, guys. I want you all to look at something real quick. And this is basically an awareness test. I want you all to pay attention to how many passes the team in white makes. Sound fair? Okay.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Anyone have an answer? 12? 13? 10. No one has just one. Good. So we're doing great. How many said 13? Anyone said 13? 12? All right, so here we go.
The answer is 13.
The answer is 13. But
did you see the moonwalking bear?
But did you see the moonwalking bear?
No.
Sure. Follow. Right here.
Oh, wow.
And just to prove it, because I've always have done this whenever teaching this, people say, that bear wasn't always there. Well, there he is. He's always been there. See him?
Yeah.
So, this becomes very interesting. So what did we learn from the exercise? We learned that knowledge is key. We learned that we have to know all the moving parts. If I told you all in the beginning, count how many passes and tell me where the moonwalking bear was, you would know exactly that there's two things. And it's hard to see something if you do not know where you're supposed to be looking for. Fair? So let's go back to our phrase, right? Non posso libre. No one? It does. Nice. So we have some context clues. It says, I can't liberate myself. Many African Americans could not liberate themselves because of the Emancipation Proclamation. Not because it wasn't written, it was because it was posted, and most Africans could not read. It was a very cruel joke that many white Southern slave owners played on African Americans. It was the ability that here is a document, a functioning document that has your freedom, but you don't know how to read. That's why, of course, the ability to read became such a crime. Anytime that you have knowledge and becomes power, well, things become a little dangerous. So we're going to look at what are the the issue 1, issue 2, and issue 3 of why do we celebrate Juneteenth. The first thing I want you all to look at is, of course, the Battle of Antietam. Has anyone heard of the Battle of Antietam? So the Battle of Antietam is one of the most famous wars or famous battles inside the Civil War. Believe it or not, there was a time where the South was absolutely destroying the North. No one saw this coming. Trust me, no one saw this coming. The North had more sophisticated materials. We're thought to be the thinkers. The South, not as sophisticated. However, the South did have a good majority of the best soldiers. So at this time during the Civil War, the South is absolutely destroying, of course, the North. It's believed that, of course, Antietam or Sharpsburg is in Maryland. That if they would have won this battle, then it gave them a straight line into D.C., which means that they would have taken over the nation's capital. And the Civil War is basically over. So inside this battle, Lincoln basically really needs this win very badly. So from September 16th to September 18th of 1862, this battle raged on. Over 22,000 people died in this 3-day period. It was one of the bloodiest battles inside the Civil War. It's probably one of the most important battles inside the Civil War. It's not because the North wanted to win this battle. It's because they basically hit a strategical tie. If they would have lost this battle outright, I should say, this is over with. However, they're able to tie. And in this tie, Lincoln gets some swag to him. He does. It shows up out of nowhere, and he writes the Emancipation Proclamation. He writes this document saying, I know we're looking bad right now, but don't worry about it. I'm freeing all the slaves. Wait, Lincoln, pause, pump your brakes. You do know we are losing. You do know we almost lost this battle. You do know this wasn't really, we're not in a situation of making mandates on the South. No, let's write it, let's print it, let's make it pop. So Lincoln writes this document, and inside this document, he not only tells people to write this document, but to go to southern states and post that this document does exist. So there were Union soldiers who went south to post this document. And believe it or not, they posted in southern states. They dressed up in plain street clothes because they didn't want to wear Union blues down south. And then they left. So that's exactly what happened. So for the fun of it all, many white slave owners kept the proclamation up. And it just sat there. And unfortunately, many African Americans or enslaved Africans at that time walked right past this document. And then didn't know anything the wiser. So this whole document of the Emancipation Proclamation is written in some blind faith. It's actually administered twice. Lincoln says the first time, hey, after the Battle of Antietam or Battle of Sharpsburg, hey, the reason why I'm releasing this document is because I believe that we're going to win. I believe everything is fine. Hey, if y'all don't release them, y'all going to be in trouble. The South, of course, goes, he doesn't know he's losing, right? He doesn't know that we're winning? Okay, that's fine. And sure enough, it's not until January 1st, 1863, where Lincoln has to release the document again, back down south, to tell enslaved Africans, hey, by the way, hint to be hint, you are free. They go to all southern states except one. And we'll discuss that in a little bit, all right? Any questions, comments, concerns, gripes, complaints, compliments? All right, there you go. So there you go. Second thing that happened is that it changed the focus of the war. Now, there are two arguments of why the Civil War happens. Just two. One, southern states leave the Union. And of course, if you leave the Union, that of course is what? Starts with a T, ends with an N. Treason, right. Treason is punishable by one thing and one thing only. You want to know? Death, correct. So, the focus of the war was that we need to teach the southern states a lesson. And it's the fact that they've committed treason. And because they've committed treason, we need them to come back. However, when the Emancipation Proclamation is signed and is then put back out on January 1st, 1863, it completely changes the focus of the war. The war no longer becomes about secession. It becomes about how do we free a group of people who are not free in the South. Now, a lot of people want to believe that, oh, the Civil War has nothing to do with slavery. If you ever hear someone say that, politely walk away. It is fine. Politely end the conversation. This is great. Good catching up. Walk away. It's not, and trust me, it is a conversation about slavery. It's about how do a group of people enjoy free labor and not want to give that up. Period. They don't want to give it up. Consider this. The year is 1786. It's 10 years from when? Declaration of Independence. When, of course, our country officially becomes a country. 1776 to 1786. How does in 10 years this new country become one of the richest countries in the world? Just think about the disturbingness of that. There's China, there's Japan, there's all of these, of course, countries that have been in existence for years on end. And now, in the first 10 years, the United States is the richest country in the world. They become the richest country in the world because they're built off of a system of free labor, which is unparamount at this time. And they've done it and mastered it so well that, of course, all this wealth is internal into what's going on, right? So, after the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, it's no longer about saving the Union, but how do we make sure that we empower a group of people who have had no power inside of our country that we live in. So it opened up the door for African-American soldiers to serve in the war. And here's the other little secret they don't teach you in history class. The United Kingdom wanted to be involved inside the Civil War. So did France. But Lincoln was embarrassed that this internal fighting would have to be solved by what? Anyone? Foreigners, by another country. So by now enlisting African-American soldiers, the Union now had more resources. In fact, how many people have seen the movie Glory before? With Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman, the single tear that Denzel Washington cries? No one? So there you go. So inside of this movie, Glory is about the 54th Infantry. It's about one of the first infantries that, of course, were created post the Emancipation Proclamation. In fact, how many people, of course, know about the Howard Shaw Metro, right? Green Line over by Howard University. General Shaw is the general that was over the 54th Infantry. That whole district is named after him. So it's named after George Shaw, who of course is over the 54th Infantry, which was one of the major colored infantry that fought inside the Civil War. And history completely overlooks the sacrifices of these men because it was a combination of free men and slaves, and they joined together post the Emancipation Proclamation. So this also helped solve and dealt into an economic issue. When the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, the South goes, well, if they are free, what happens to our labor force? We don't want to pay them. We've been doing great by not paying them. We pay them in fear. We pay them in the idea of them not having family members. We pay them in dismemberment. We pay them in all of these horrible things that have nothing to do with any type of economic gain. But it restructures how the South may have to look at paying a workforce. And of course, they want nothing to do with it. At this time in 1865, did that correctly, Lincoln's life has been threatened close to 36 times. It's a lot. In fact, the day that he's elected, Lincoln has to ride in a coffin from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, all the way to D.C. to make sure that he makes his first inauguration. That's how many times Lincoln's life was threatened because of the idea or the belief that when he was elected that he was going to get rid of slavery. It's kind of crazy. So in fact, it's a very interesting story about how Lincoln had to, pretend like he was an old man, sit in a wheelchair. After sitting in a wheelchair, had to go on a train. The train was stopped, put in a coffin, and rode from basically in the back of a coffin, pulled by a horse from Harrisburg to D.C. to finally, that was the only way that he was going to be safe. Which, of course, gave birth to what we now know as the Secret Service. Crazy. All right? Questions, comments, concerns? Cool? All right. Just making sure. The third thing that comes up, oh boy, here we go. The third thing that comes up as far as like before we get to really or the last thing you need to know about as we start to unpack about as far as with Juneteenth and understanding the Emancipation Proclamation, which is this really important document which flips the script on American history, is that nobody wanted to go to Texas. No, I ain't going. No, fam, I can't go. You going? No, I can't go. You want to go? No, I can't go. Are you busy? You want to go to Texas? No, I go. You know what? I got to wash my hair. I can't go. I really can't go. And I got to clip my toenails, and I got to microwave something. The microwave's not even been invented yet. I know, but I got to go invent it so I can microwave it, and then don't worry about it. So here's the thing, right? And during this time, deep in the South, no Civil War battles happened in Texas. Not one. No one wanted to go to Texas. Period. Why? Texas was the hub of where all the Confederate soldiers were. 2, it was also the hub of where all the ammunition was. So literally, think about D.C., think about you have an executive order, you want to free slaves, and now you want to go all the way down to Texas. Many men that were assigned that task were unfortunately either murdered or got lost along the way. Yeah, I'm going. I got you because, I'm brave out here. Don't worry, I'll be all right. Oh, no, it wasn't going to happen. It's really bad. So that's one of the things that happened. Many soldiers wound up being killed. It was also one of the richest states thanks to slavery. So what wound up happening is that when the Emancipation Proclamation did come out, it never reached Texas. And Texas literally had a 2-year border around it, where if people in Texas that were slave owners knew about it, but the slaves that they had did not know about it. And if you're a free slave, you're not going to Texas. You're probably going as far away from Texas as possible. Oh man, I'm free. We should tell the people in Texas. Oh, they find out, just tweet them. Twitter ain't been invented yet. Don't worry, I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to invent it. I'm going to Instagram it and live chat it. Don't worry, it'll be good. No, none of this is going to happen. The other thing is that happens is unfortunately in a pathway before Lincoln was unfortunately assassinated, Lincoln wanted to go to Texas personally to deliver this news. That's really bold. But unfortunately we know that Lincoln was unfortunately assassinated at Ford's Theater, dies at the Peterman House, which is across the street from Ford's Theater. Does anyone know this? It's aligned with what religious holiday? This happened in line with what religious holiday? Anyone know? Easter, correct. Lincoln, unfortunately, is assassinated, shot on Good Friday, winds up dying close or early Easter Sunday morning. A lot of people don't know that. Here's another interesting biblical tie-in. His wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, because she's so depressed about the idea that her husband is now gone, especially because it was her idea to go see My American Cousin, she traps herself inside the White House for 40 days and 40 nights. And she wears black the rest of her life. In fact, she never goes to see him lay in state. When he's carried out of the White House, she says to the soldiers, I know you have to remove his body, but remove your shoes and remove your socks and remove all your weapons, because I don't want to hear that he's been taken. I just want to wake up and know that he's gone. The country was truly in mourning when this happened. So the lasting legacy was, of course, on June 19, 1865, when General Gordon Granger goes to Galveston, Texas, and says, hey, we're here, y'all, and hinty hint, y'all are free. Is this just now happening? Here's the thing. This really happened 2 years ago. Sorry. But that's what it was. For 2 years, the state of Texas was considered to be so dangerous that no one wanted any part of it. And that's the end of our story. Well, it's not. Even though we celebrate Juneteenth and we say this is the day that all slaves knew that they were free, they really didn't. Unfortunately, news of this had to spread all throughout Texas, and it took all the way to December of 1865. So think about it. They find out in April. Well, I'm sorry, they find out in June, which would be June 19th. That's June, July, August, September, October, November, December. This isn't the last, in June, that's not the last group of slaves to find out. The last group of slaves find out in December, which is absolutely like parallel to it, right? To put it in context, how much do you think this bottle of water weighs? 16 ounces. Okay, 16 ounces, fair guess. Anyone else? No one else? Oh, no one else want to guess? Oh, no one's going to match that. Okay, so imagine if I had to hold this. Yeah, what you got for your guess? 20 ounces. That's fair. Anyone else? It's 23 ounces, 23.7, according to the good people at Deer Park. So I know that I'm holding 23.7 ounces of water, right? That's fair. Now, what happens if I hold this over time? It gets heavier. But does the weight of this change? What changes? Muscle deterioration, and most importantly, fatigue and time. The last people that, of course, found out they were free are dealing with muscle fatigue. To know that 2 years ago when you find out that you were technically free, kind of hurts. So when they find out, a lot of them don't believe that they're free. In fact, their muscle memory tells them, I still need to hold this bottle of water. No, you can really let it go. No, I can't, because my muscle memory tells me I have to hold it. See, I want to let it go, and you tell me I can let it go, but I can't let it go. It's my muscle fatigue. It's literally like a Stockholm syndrome that I've now become used to. In fact, most slaves, after they found out that they were free, stayed on the plantation and stayed serving their masters for an average an additional 6 years. You've been told you can leave, but I can't because my muscle memory tells me I can't. And I'm used to holding this weight. And even though I know I can let this weight go at any time, I won't. It's one of the saddest parts of the Emancipation Proclamation and, of course, of Juneteenth, of knowing that there are a group of people who literally just couldn't let go, even for their own sake, right? So, this is just a quick map of where Galveston is, and of course, the city that's north of Galveston is Houston. So they literally are cutting through from Kentucky, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, all the way here. And all of this information about all these other slaves finding out that they're free takes until December. And this is why it's funny whenever I teach this to, of course, younger scholars, the idea of how slow information passes is like, it shocks them. But literally, this is how slow it would take. And then, of course, you're dealing with the fact of you have Southerners who see Union soldiers, and they know if there's Union soldiers here, they're only here to do one thing and one thing only, to free people. And, of course, the conflicts that they get into, the fights that they get into. And these, no matter how hard you try to peel back your history pages inside of most schools, they never talk about the battles post the Civil War. This is not Reconstruction. This is literally called the Battle for Emancipation. Very few historians actually talk about this, about after the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, how there are all these mini battles that happen in smaller southern states. They're as bloody as most like Civil War battles, because people are like, I'm not letting my slaves go. But the slaves are like, no, I'm sick of this. Give me a gun? Sweet. And this is unfortunately what it is. Questions, comments, concerns? Is this intriguing to you all? A lot of you guys are giving that, like, I just showed you how expensive a Porsche was. You guys are going, really? Right? So here you go. All right. So, Juneteenth in review. Believe it or not, there are states that do not recognize Juneteenth. Hi, it's 2019. There are states that still do not recognize Juneteenth. Will not acknowledge that it happened or anything. In fact, Rhode Island just got off my history naughty list, but the states that still believe that or will not acknowledge Juneteenth are Hawaii, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota. When asked about it by normal or formal legislation about will they ever do it, says it's not a priority. Welcome. 2, even after the announcement, many slaves stayed with their masters for an average of 6 years out of fear. And it's not just necessarily fear, it's also not having knowledge to know. What do you do? That's why another very important document that really doesn't get poured into enough is, of course, the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau is not just the fact of now there's money, now that there are historically black colleges and universities that are being built, i.e. like a Howard, like a Hampton, like a Dillard, like a Wilberforce are being built. But it's also the fact of that southern states need a stimulus package. How many people have ever heard that before about this part of the Freedmen's Bureau? Cool, sweet. So part of the Freedmen's Bureau is that there was a dirty little secret that came out. Many plantations were burnt down to the ground, of course, by Union soldiers. Of course, one of the most destructive burning downs of plantations or of a city is of Port Royal, South Carolina. And it was actually done by a woman who led this charge. She was 5'1", she could not read, could not write, and her name was Harriet Tubman. Yep, Harriet Tubman, codename Moses. That she led a charge on Port Royal, South Carolina, and basically destroyed Port Royal, South Carolina. So when all of these white southern plantation owners are now dealing with the fact that they have no wealth, they have nothing to do, they're coming back to the Union out of fear that they may be killed, many, of course, Union officials are like, well, you guys can rebuild everything, can't you? I can't read. What? I can't read. That's why I didn't want them to be able to read. I can't read either. So, stop me if you heard this before. Southern plantation owners were given a stimulus every month to help rebuild back up their plantation. Some modern setup of what we know as government assistance and welfare today was set up because of the Civil War. After World War I, World War II, the Civil Rights Movement caused the celebration of Juneteenth in the South across the country to halt. Like many African Americans kind of really had bigger fish to fry, unfortunately. It's unfortunate that if you just study through history, it's the peculiar relationship that African Americans have with military services. How do you, being someone who's not given full rights and privileges inside this country, fight for the freedoms for other people to have this freedom, but yet you yourself don't get those freedoms? It's a very awkward and abusive relationship to a certain extent. In fact, if I had additional time, during the time of World War I, there was, of course, the riot of World War I that happened early 1900s, where a group of African-American soldiers, after being abused and talked about so badly, they decided to basically throw a mutiny in the city of Houston, Texas. It took W.E.B. Du Bois to come in and basically settle everything between the soldiers and, of course, these white Southerners to basically make sure that African Americans could actually reappear inside of military forces, believe it or not. And last but not least, though you all have, I hope you all have enjoyed this, because you guys' faces are like, I don't know how to feel about this. This It's a lot. So there you go. Believe it or not, Juneteenth is not part of standard curriculum for ELA or social studies anywhere in this country. Anywhere. It's not even mentioned. The Emancipation Proclamation is mentioned, Reconstruction. There's never a talk about what happened to Juneteenth, about why the news of it took so long, about all of the many battles that happened in between for this to even happen. It's not mentioned at all. So, that's it. That's my time on Juneteenth. I hope that you all have enjoyed it. Do you all have any questions I guess I should ask? I'll open up for that. Because I feel like I've done a lot of talking. But do you all have any questions? Yes?
Are there